We won't do business with a company that hires high school graduates. Get out.
She said this with a malicious smile. At the client's office, where I went for the business meeting, my ex-wife Betty, who was working as a receptionist, threw these words at me. She probably thought she was mocking me as a joke, but it was far too disrespectful. This was a business setting. Bringing personal feelings into it left me too exasperated to engage in a proper conversation. I agreed to the meeting because I was asked to. But if this is how I'm going to be treated, I don't need this deal. Got it. We'll cancel everything, I said curtly and turned to leave the reception. Betty blinked in surprise, apparently not expecting me to back down so quickly. My name is Jack Smith, and I turned 50 this year. I always thought I was still young, but before I knew it, I reached this age. When you look ahead in life, it feels long, but when you look back, it passes in the blink of an eye. Time flies so fast. The words of my elementary school teacher resonate with me now more than ever. When I was young, I was quite the troublemaker. My family was poor, so I didn't care much about studying. I hung out with the local bad kids and got into all sorts of mischief. Although I went to a local college, I never really grew up and kept getting into fights. After getting suspended multiple times, I eventually dropped out. So my highest level of education is high school. After I stopped going to school, I got even wilder. I rode my motorcycle everywhere, went out drinking heavily in bars, and got into fights with anyone I didn't like. Honestly, I think I was a complete jerk back then. What turned my life around was the president of a small local factory who took the time to genuinely talk with me. At that time, I was struggling with self-loathing because I was almost 20 and still acting like a fool. And on the other hand, I was anxious about what I could possibly do with my life. The president saved me from these complicated feelings. He also had been a troublemaker in his youth. That's probably why he understood how I felt. I started working at the small factory and learned mold design. Mold design is an essential job for mass-producing industrial products. Most factories use molds to pour in molten metal or plastic, which is then cooled and solidified to create products. Therefore, mold designers were highly valued at that time. I became passionate about this job. The more I worked, the more I appreciated the depth of the field, and I was happiest when I felt needed by others. I decided to live my life as a mold designer and have walked a straight path ever since. A turning point came for me when I was 40 years old. I ran into Betty, who I used to hang out with when I was a bad boy, and we ended up getting married. She was quite a troublemaker back then too. Betty is 4 years younger than me, and she was like a little sister back then. Though she had a tough personality, Betty had striking features and was very popular. She always had a crowd around her. It's truly strange how life works, ending up marrying someone like her. By the way, this is my first marriage, but Betty's second. However, that didn't bother me at all. We were both at an age where it wasn't about falling madly in love. We reconnected at a time when we were both more settled and mature, and I think we were just naturally drawn to each other. Knowing each other's pasts and understanding each other's circumstances was probably a good thing. On the other hand, we both had strong personalities, so we clashed often. Fighting was a regular occurrence in our household. We would argue, confronting each other head on. I'm not the type to back down, and she's very competitive, so our fights often dragged on. Despite that, The fact that we've been together for 10 years means our relationship wasn't that bad after all. Betty and I were full of flaws, but I believe that as long as we complemented each other, we could live together forever. However, an event occurred that led to the breakdown of our marriage. That event was the bankruptcy of the small factory where I worked. The company started to decline after the president, who had always looked out for me, passed away and his son took over. I guess the company couldn't keep up with the changing times. Even so, I had pride in my work as a mold designer and thought I would find another job quickly. However, the world isn't that forgiving. I went from being needed to not being needed at all. I was depressed and withdrawn because of that. And maybe that was why Betty handed me divorce papers.
You're no longer needed. I'm divorcing you because you're useless.
Her harsh words pushed me into an even deeper depression. A while back, I would have fought back with all my might. But having lost my job and my confidence, I didn't have the strength. In the end, I complied with Betty's demands and we divorced. To make matters worse, she took most of our assets, leaving me with only a small amount of savings and unemployment benefits, forcing me into a life of poverty. Is this how my life is going to end? In loneliness? I spent my days in a gloomy mood, drinking cheap liquor. Then, some surprising news came my way. It suggested that my divorce from Betty might not have been caused by the factory's bankruptcy. I had always thought that losing my job and my subsequent lack of motivation were the reasons for our divorce. After all, that's what Betty had told me. However, former colleagues from the factory and friends from my younger days told me that Betty had been cozying up with a flashy guy even before the factory went bankrupt. At first, I dismissed it as mere gossip and didn't listen. But when multiple sources told me the same thing and even provided definitive photographic evidence, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The photos showed Betty and an unfamiliar man closely embracing. Betty, my wife, had been seeing another man. It seemed like an undeniable truth. And this revelation reignited my fighting spirit. Damn it, Betty. Don't underestimate me. My anger at Betty's betrayal fueled my determination. I refused to let it end like this. I made up my mind to restart my job search. I will prove Betty wrong for abandoning me. My mind focused on that one point. No matter how many times I was rejected in interviews, I didn't give up and kept knocking on the doors of other companies. I believed that somewhere there was a company that needed my skills, and I pushed forward with determination. There were many times when I felt like giving up, but in those moments, I thought of Betty, her sneering, condescending smile as she mocked me. Imagining that expression reignited my fighting spirit. And 6 months after I restarted my job search, I finally found a new job. It was with a major manufacturer, introduced to me by the second-generation president of the small factory I used to work at. The idea that a top-tier company would hire a high school graduate mold designer like me seemed unbelievable. However, they seemed to highly value my skills as a mold designer. At this company, I not only designed complex molds, but also got involved in sales support and even some aspects of sales. My ability to quickly judge whether a project was feasible and estimate the budget became useful in various situations. Being needed again gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Wearing suits, which I wasn't used to, and teaching young colleagues the craft were not burdensome. On the contrary, every day felt fresh, and I was filled with energy. I realized that I was riding the second wave of my life. 2 years after changing jobs, I had a fateful encounter. It all started with a manufacturing request from a certain company. That company requested us to manufacture a custom-made machine for them. They had contacted several machine manufacturers, but all had turned them down, leaving them desperate. I decided to review the machine specifications they sent and determine if it was feasible. The result was clear-cut. With the results in hand, I went to meet them. And then, the fateful encounter happened suddenly. I saw Betty standing at the reception desk. My heart started pounding. My desire to show off my success at a top-tier company clashed with my inner doubts about the purpose of such an action. Will she switch with another receptionist? I peeked out from behind the building's entrance. It didn't look like she was going to change. I steeled myself and walked to the reception desk. The moment Betty saw me, she glared at me. Her hostility was obvious. It was the same look she had when we faced off against rival groups in our younger days. Betty, with her defiant stance, was trying to intimidate me. I reminded myself not to fall for her provocation and faced her in a businesslike manner. My name is Jack from Rainbow Machinery. I have a meeting scheduled with Thomas, the manager. The person in front of me is not Betty. I told myself this as I started the conversation. Betty twisted her mouth into a smirk and spoke.
What? What are you talking about? There's no way you're an employee of Rainbow Machinery.
Apparently, Betty thought I was pretending to be someone I'm not. I took out my business card from my breast pocket, placed it on the reception desk, and slid it towards her with my finger. There, that should shut her up. But just as I thought that, Betty sneered.
You even went as far as making fake business cards. Are you really that desperate to make yourself look important? You've always pretended to be strong despite being weak, and you haven't changed at all. Are you here to pick a fight because you saw me working at a top-tier company? If so, just stop. I have no intention of dealing with someone as insignificant as you.
Betty refused to believe my identity at all. In that case, I had no choice but to ask her to connect me with Thomas, the manager. I can understand why you doubt me, Betty, but this is a legitimate business deal. If you ask Thomas, he'll confirm it. So, could you please connect me to him quickly? There might have been a hint of irritation in my tone. Maybe sensing that, Betty said something unexpected.
What do you plan to do when you meet him? Revenge.
What do you mean? This is a business meeting. It's my first time meeting Thomas. Why would I seek revenge? I burst out. After I said it, I realized my tone had become harsh. I had tried to stay calm until now, but my true nature was beginning to show.
What? It's not revenge. Oh, I see. But I still can't connect you. Someone as incompetent as you doesn't match up with Thomas. You're probably just trying to sell something shady under the guise of a business deal.
Her words infuriated me. I would have loved to yell at her and start a real fight, but that would only cause trouble for my company. I swallowed my rising anger and spoke in a low voice. Whether it's shady or not, I'm here because your company requested this meeting. If you don't connect me, you might regret it. Betty stared into my eyes. As our eyes met, I was once again struck by her beauty. She's aged, but she still looks incredible. As I was thinking this, I saw a devilish glint in Betty's eyes.
Absolutely not. If I believe this lie, Thomas will scold me. There's no way I can trust a company that would hire a loser like you.
Betty sneered.
We won't do business with a company that hires high school graduates. Get out.
She said this with a malicious smile. She probably thought she was mocking me as a joke. but it was far too disrespectful. This was a business setting. Bringing personal feelings into it left me too exasperated to engage in a proper conversation. I agreed to the meeting because I was asked to. But if this is how I'm going to be treated, I don't need this deal. Got it. We'll cancel everything, I said curtly and turned to leave the reception. Betty blinked in surprise, apparently not expecting me to back down so quickly. Give my regards to Thomas. Tell him we will never do business with your company again. Without looking back, I left the reception area. The deal didn't go through, but for some reason, I felt relieved. That was because I wasn't really enthusiastic about this project in the first place. There wasn't much benefit for my company to take on this job. When the offer came in, I could have turned it down immediately. However, the challenge of designing a complex mold ignited my craftsman spirit, and I wanted to see if it was feasible. In the end, I determined it was doable. With our company's technology, it was possible. But since there was no significant profit, I wasn't willing to proceed unless they accepted our terms fully. Moreover, there were some unsettling rumors about Thomas's company. That was another reason I wasn't eager to move forward. So being turned away by Betty didn't hurt my company at all. Although my frustration was still simmering, I happened to look up at the sky, which was bright blue. But when I lowered my gaze a bit, I noticed billowing cumulonimbus clouds starting to form. At that moment, Betty's face came to mind. Thinking about the trouble she was about to encounter, I couldn't help but smile. One side desperately needs our company to handle this job, while the other side doesn't care either way. Betty doesn't understand the situations that our respective companies are in. Imagining what she might do next, I decided to head back to my office. An hour after returning to my desk, I received a call from Thomas.
Jack, what happened with today's meeting? I've been waiting for quite a while.
Though Thomas spoke politely, I could sense his frustration. Oh? Didn't the receptionist tell you anything? I came by saying I had an appointment with you, but I was turned away. I even mentioned it was an important business meeting. I replied with a hint of sarcasm. Thomas sounded shocked. It seemed Betty hadn't informed him that she had sent me away.
I'm terribly sorry. She must have mistaken you for some dubious salesperson or something.
Do I look a dubious salesperson? Well, if that's how I came across, it can't be helped. I responded with a wry smile. I know I don't have the most approachable face. My past has made me prone to glaring at people unintentionally. But Betty was the same way.
I'll make sure to speak to the receptionist about this. Could you please come back one more time?
Thomas spoke as if trying to gauge my mood. Of course, it's Thomas's side that's in a bind. However, I'm not so kind as to go back again. That's a bit difficult. I have a lot of work piled up. Besides, I don't want to see that receptionist again. Let's put this matter on hold for now, I replied in a soft tone. Thomas, clearly not expecting this response, hurriedly replied,
Put it on hold? Wait, did our receptionist really behave that rudely?
From the way Thomas was talking, I could tell he was feeling desperate. Well, yes, sort of. When I answered vaguely, Thomas pressed on.
I'm truly sorry about that. I'll make sure to talk to her sternly, so please forgive us. If your company rejects us, it will be a huge blow to us. Please, I'm begging you.
Thomas's desperation was evident, but the more he talked, the more a certain suspicion grew within me. Who was the woman at the reception?
Betty.
What's her last name?
Smith. Why?
I thought so. The same last name as mine, you know? But it's not just a coincidence that we share a last name, I said teasingly. And Thomas immediately reacted.
What do you mean by that?
Actually, Betty is my ex-wife. That's why we have the same last name. It seems she didn't revert to her maiden name. I'm surprised to see her at my visit. She put me through a lot of trouble. Even though she was seeing another man, she made me out to be the bad guy and pushed for a divorce. On top of that, she took most of our assets. It was a nightmare. That's why I don't want to have anything to do with her. As I spoke in a weary tone, Thomas fell silent. He was probably bewildered by me bringing up personal matters in a business setting. But I suspected there was more to it. I began to think that Thomas might be the one Betty had an affair with, or even her serious partner. Betty said something incomprehensible to me, like, "Have you come for revenge?" And Thomas's reaction to my story seemed a bit off. These clues started to form a coherent picture, making my suspicions seem more plausible. Thomas was likely the one who had stolen my wife. He was probably too shocked to negotiate with such an awkward counterpart, leaving him at a loss for words. Anyway, let's just reset this matter for now. As I was about to hang up, Thomas mumbled something indistinctly, trying to keep the conversation going. Having no other choice, I used the excuse of urgent work to forcibly end the call. I wondered how Thomas would interact with Betty after this, and how Betty would react after hearing the story from Thomas. Like ripples spreading across a lake, my mind began to stir. That evening, Betty called me right away. As soon as I answered, she began ranting in an agitated tone.
Hey, you need to cut it out. It's awful to harass someone out of spite.
She was so emotional that she didn't convey anything specific. Why are you so worked up? You were the one who said you didn't want the contract. I just took you at your word. I told you at the reception. We won't do business with your company. Since you didn't pass that along, I had to reiterate it. I spoke calmly, without raising my voice. Betty, perhaps feeling guilty about her behavior at the reception, started muttering.
The way I handled it at the reception was wrong. I just didn't think someone like you could get a job at a top-tier company. But that was just a misunderstanding. What I said was a joke. I never seriously meant we wouldn't do business. So please reconsider.
Betty spoke in a pleading tone. She must have been scolded severely by Thomas and told to make amends. No way. That deal is off the table. I'm not interested in discussing it anymore. When I coldly dismissed her, Betty immediately reacted.
Why are you being so stubborn? You're being immature over a minor misunderstanding. Aren't you 50 years old? Can't you be a little more reasonable?
This isn't about that. The negotiation is over. Getting tired of the conversation, I responded brusquely. Still, Betty wouldn't give up.
Wait a minute. If this goes on, I'll be in a tough spot. I'm begging you, please restart the negotiations with him.
Please restart the negotiations. It's clear they're together. Look, I've been listening to you, and it sounds like you and Thomas are involved, right? It started before our divorce, didn't it? You're only working as the receptionist because of his connections, aren't you? Thomas is unfortunate too. Making you, his girlfriend, the receptionist, led to the deal falling through. I spoke with a mocking tone, and Betty snapped.
A former delinquent with a high school diploma is talking big. Oh, I get it. You're jealous of me and him, aren't you? That's why you're canceling the deal as revenge. Retaliating like this just shows you haven't changed at all from back then. Male jealousy is pathetic, especially from an old man like you.
Her words rubbed me the wrong way. She always mocked me for being a high school graduate and useless. But I wanted to throw those words right back at her. Betty dropped out of college, and she's useless too. She's only working as a receptionist because of Thomas's connections. All she's good for is her looks, with nothing inside. She can't even handle a proper business conversation and lets personal feelings create trouble. She's the worst. I had plenty to say in return, but it felt pointless. I take pride in having built my position as a mold designer at a top-tier company. Betty, who got her job through connections, is on a different level. Engaging with her seriously felt foolish. You've said whatever you wanted. Are you satisfied now? No matter what you say, I'm not changing my mind. The deal is off, and the negotiations are over. That's final. I pulled the phone away from my ear. Sensing that I was about to hang up, I heard Betty shouting. Ignoring her, I ended the call. Then immediately, the phone started ringing again, so I turned it off. Thomas probably thought he could use my ex-wife Betty to restart the negotiations, but he picked the wrong person to ask. Trusting Betty, who has nothing inside, with this task was a waste. In the end, she just lost her temper, leading to this mess. But honestly, my decision to end the deal wasn't based on personal issues. There was another reason I didn't want to restart the negotiations. I didn't think Thomas would give up that easily. Considering the situation, we're the only company capable of producing that machine. I've heard that Thomas's company is betting everything on this project, so he's bound to try something. With these thoughts in mind, I arrived at work the next morning and found two people standing outside my company. One of them was Betty, and the other was the man I had seen in the photo shown to me by my old friends. The man who seemed to be Betty's boyfriend. So, Thomas was Betty's boyfriend after all. Although I had suspected it, seeing them together brought a painful pang to my chest.
Jack, please reconsider the negotiations.
Thomas pleaded desperately. Betty, standing next to him, also pleaded, albeit a bit more reluctantly. I had anticipated that Thomas might come to the office, but I never expected him to bring Betty along. Not wanting to have a discussion outside the building, I decided to escort them to the meeting room.
I truly apologize for everything. As you probably know, it would be a huge problem for us if your company refuses. Please reconsider.
While Thomas pleaded desperately, Betty looked around the room nervously. I'm sorry you came all this way, but we cannot accept your request, I said firmly. No matter how much they pleaded, no meant no. But Thomas wouldn't give up and continued to beg desperately.
I am truly sorry for Betty's rude behavior. If firing her will make amends, I am willing to do whatever it takes. Please, just tell me what you need.
When Thomas said this, Betty puffed out her cheeks in defiance. Noticing this, Thomas frowned and glared at her.
This is all your fault. What's with that attitude? Apologize properly and ask for forgiveness.
Thomas said with obvious disgust. However, instead of apologizing, Betty leaned back and pouted even more.
Hey you, cut it out. I said apologize now. Do it.
Thomas grabbed Betty's arm, trying to force her to apologize to me, but she shook off his hand and glared back at him. The situation was becoming explosive. Watching this disgraceful display was starting to make me uncomfortable. Seeing no other option, I decided to reveal the truth. That's enough. Thomas, the reason we can't do business with your company isn't because of her rude behavior or the inappropriate relationship you two had behind my back. The real reason we can't do business with Thomas's company is that there are allegations that his company is illegally exporting products prohibited by law. For security reasons, exporting precision machinery overseas requires very thorough checks. There's a suspicion within the industry that his company has been exporting without clearing those checks. And we've received information that an investigation is about to take place. If this is true, it could be a big problem for us as well. Doing business with a company engaged in illegal activities. If we did that, our company could also come under suspicion. Therefore, until the allegations are cleared, our upper management has decided we cannot proceed with the deal. The timing of this directive coincided with Betty's inappropriate behavior, making the situation more complicated. But ultimately, the suspension of the deal is not because of her attitude or his relationship with her. That's why I said we should put the deal on hold for now. When I finished explaining, Betty leaned forward and grabbed Thomas by the collar.
Hey, how are you going to make this right? It wasn't my fault, was it? After all the nasty things you said, don't mess with me. You won't get away with this.
Thomas shrank back from her intensity. He was probably shocked by her sudden change in behavior.
Betty, we're at a client's office. Stop it.
Thomas faltered and said to her,
I'm getting fired anyway, right? I don't care about appearances anymore. Besides, you never left your wife for me. You deceived me. We're done. I'm going to ruin your family.
Betty's true nature emerged. She may look beautiful, but when she's angry, she's uncontrollable. She had been hiding her true self since she started dating Thomas. But deep down, people don't change that easily.
Wait, let's calm down and talk this out. Come on, Betty. I was wrong. Please forgive me.
Thomas, having slumped out of his chair, desperately tried to soothe Betty, but she wasn't having any of it. The ugly argument showed no signs of ending. Watching the fight between these two villains was amusing, but I was starting to get bored. Both of you, cut it out. If this goes on any longer, I'll call security. Take it outside, I said coldly, urging them to leave. Even as she left the meeting room, Betty didn't let go of Thomas's collar. I called out to her, Hey, Betty, it's time to grow up. You're not young anymore, and you can't get by on your looks forever. I laughed as I said it, and Betty bit her lip hard. Her face was trembling with anger, but it also seemed filled with sadness. I'll probably never see her again, I thought as I watched her leave. Afterward, Betty, true to her word, exposed her relationship with Thomas to his wife, destroying his family. She is terrifying in times like these. Once she decides to do something, she always follows through. She was quite the troublemaker back in the day. Thomas was unlucky to have fallen for Betty's beauty. He probably never imagined she had such a dark past. But having a wife and pursuing a woman who was married, he got what he deserved. Thomas's wife was introduced to him by the senior managing director. As a result, his reputation within the company plummeted. Unable to bear it, Thomas resigned from the company. On top of that, he's being sued for a large amount of alimony. As for Betty, she achieved her goal of destroying Thomas's family. But the way she did it became widely known, and she got fired. She never had the aptitude for working in a company, so it'll be interesting to see how she supports herself from now on. Her much prized beauty is nearing its expiration date, and her inner nastiness is starting to show, which will only make her appearance worse as she ages. There won't be any more men interested in her. On the other hand, my career is progressing smoothly. My company ended up taking on the manufacturing job that Thomas's company had requested, as the suspicions of illegal exports were cleared. It turned out that the allegations were false. My company proposed a price for the machine manufacturing that would yield a significant profit for us. Our sales team thought the client wouldn't agree to such a high price, but given their desperate situation, they accepted it without hesitation. I am currently working on a highly complex mold design. The challenge excites my craftsman spirit, and I experience a thrilling tension as I immerse myself in the work every day. Incidentally, since the overseas illegal export allegations turned out to be false, both Betty and Thomas suffered unnecessarily. If it weren't for those suspicions, no matter how much I was ridiculed at reception or how inappropriate their relationship was, I wouldn't have rejected the deal outright. If not for those suspicions, the two of them would not have fallen out. Thomas's family wouldn't have collapsed, and Betty wouldn't have been fired. But these must be their punishment for their misdeeds. In other words, it's karma. However, these events are in the past, and there's no point in dwelling on them now. Since divorcing Betty, I've been experiencing good fortune. For the rest of my life, what I need from others is what I want